Hello, hello. Well, today I'm going to try to read Sarah Boone's latest letter. Now, I hope you'll be with me on this, but this is really going to be difficult because she's actually addressing it to Judge Michael Kraynick, who I have been very clear and very obvious that I think he's an excellent judge, and he was more than fair to Miss Sarah Boone during her trial. Um, I'm not going to read the part of the statement that she already addressed, so I'm going to do my best to read this letter. It's a bit snarky, and I'm going to apologize in advance for my tone, but this one's a little hard to take. Those of you that watched the trial with me, since January of 2024, when George Michael Kraynick took over, I watched him be very patient with Sarah Boone, give her the benefit of doubt, assist her in getting her discovery and working with the prison to get everything that she needed. He was very patient and actually quite kind and empathetic towards her situation. I found him to be not only so well versed in the law at the drop of a hat, very dignified and steady in the procedures and what needed to be done, but also very compassionate to all sides. And he was able to get this trial to happen after years. I have a lot of respect for him. So reading this is going to be rough. Get something to drink, maybe a snack, and a soft pillow to toss when it gets too aggravating. Because I read through the whole thing already, and boy, does it. And a side note, I won't be reading the parts that she read in the courtroom in sentencing for her statement. I will link you the whole document below so you can, but I'll be reading her part to George Kraynick from the beginning, and then I'll be reading the parts at the middle and towards the end that she left out or added. Here we go. December 6, 2024. Mr. Michael Kraynick. I am enclosing, please, my complete statement to you in the world as I partially read during my sentencing hearing. By my reserving particular parts of my very true and meaningful statement, I was hoping to have been granted with your forgiveness, understanding, and consideration in any level or degree. For me, unfortunately, and regardless of when I had spoke on my behalf, or the number of your ignorant mind was already made up. By your clear error and full blown unfair bias against me since your involvement in my crucible case as a whole, I have been unsuccessful in receiving anything from you as a supposed fair and neutral judge, except for your wish that I spend the rest of my life in prison. Please know and always remember, Mr. Kraynick, I forgive you, still and sincerely. Please understand also, the judge, according to Cicero, is never to lose sight that he is simply a man, that he cannot exceed the power given to him by his commission, that not only power but public confidence has been given to him, that he ought always very seriously to attend not to his wishes, but to the requisitions of law, of justice, and religion. I am excited in my appeal, which speaks for itself. My case law as well, in which I am extremely proud to have achieved and will continue doing so now that I am no longer in your corrupt court and free from your malevolent judicial grip. Sarah Boone versus the state of Florida. I have also added to my statement as a result of your blindness and impartiality, foremost your disgust in me as being an outspoken woman, determined defendant, and proactive client, hoping the next time you put on your listening ears and do not unfairly oppress the next as you have so blatantly done me. You will never admit your many judicial errors, nor will the prosecutors theirs, and I will never admit to what you have wrongfully accused me of and judged me as. I am not a murderer. I am a survivor. Sarah Boone. Well, before we go on, I do hate to say that the lack of disrespect there by referring to Judge Kraynick as Mr. instead of his judge, which he is entitled to and should always be revered as and referred to as. I can't get over how this just sounds like a petulant, spoiled brat throwing a hissy fit because she didn't get her way. And she can use all the big words she wants and make all the grandiose quotes. Well, basically, Sarah just appears to be really annoyed that no one seems to see it her way. This whole letter is drenched in absolutely self righteousness. There is not an ounce of remorse or regret for the loss of George's life, at least none with sincerity. There is only blame, accusation, and self pity. For someone who claims to be so strong, she wears the shield of victimhood like the world can't touch her or see. Unfortunately for her, it's thin. And although I will admit that there was a very contentious relationship between George and Sarah, I am not going to say that she is the true victim here. There were victims all around. She just wants to be the biggest one, the only one. Sarah then proceeds to write some information for us all, explanations so that we can understand that we're just not as smart as her. She needs to re educate all of us so that we see it her way. So let's begin. Black robe disease, arrogance in a judge, a slang term for a judge who flaunts judicial power and dominates proceedings at the expense of the suspension of justice. Impartiality is the first duty of a judge. Before he gives an opinion or sits in judgment in a cause, he ought to be certain and absolute that he has no bias for or against either of the parties. If he has any interest in the most slightest in the cause, he is disqualified from sitting as a judge, and when aware of such interest, ought to lawfully and justly refuse to sit on a case. The delicacy which characterizes the judges in this country generally forbids their sitting in such a cause. The judge must not only be impartial, but must also follow and properly enforce the law, not abuse. He is bound to declare what law is, and not make it, be not an arbitrator, but an interpreter of the law. It is their duty to be patient in the investigation of the case, understand circumstances and difficulties by all parties, careful in considering parts of a case in whole, and decent in judgment. You know, from the Beauvais Law Dictionary, the 2012 edition. But at the risk of practicing judicial centricism, a word I have coined in this presentation, others have called it black robe disease. Whether he was correct or not in my behavior, it is widely accepted that judicial behavior affects the jury. And then there is the worst of judicial ailments, the black robe disease, which is otherwise known as arrogance. She's just going to quote us into trying to agree with her. I'm afraid I don't. I just don't. I don't think George Kraynick was unfair at all. Trial judges are affirmatively charged with securing a fair trial and must intervene sua sponte to the end when necessary. Brown v. Walter. That duty encompasses not only the avoidance of error before it occurs, but the fair correction of error that may have occurred earlier in a proceeding. In the instant case, the trial judge did not analyze the evidence he added to it, dealing with the moral mannerisms of the accused in giving his testimony. The judge put his own experience, with all the weight that could be attached to it, in the scale against the accused. That's the end of her part to George Kraynick. But I don't know about you all, and I do welcome your opinions, so please add to the comments to let me know. But I don't agree with Sarah about this at all. It's not unusual for me not to agree with Sarah, but I do try to be reasonable and not be too biased. But her opinion of George Kraynick, because he sentenced her to life, I understand her being angry. Well, to say that he was not doing his job professionally, or that he has failed in his judicial responsibility to the people, to everyone else, well, that's just unfair. I can understand she feels he failed her because he did not do what she wanted. But you can quote all of these cases, but you won't be able to say that Judge Michael Kraynick had black robe disease. There will be not a single person out here, except for maybe your defense attorney, that would agree. You sound like a spoiled brat, in as much as you want to sound like you're so intelligent because you can read and copy a damn quote from a law book or a case. Well, anyone can search anything under an agenda to make a case. It doesn't make you right, but you're definitely showing your ass. Let's go on to some other parts. Now, here is where she talked about Kinsukoro, which was the fixing of delicate china with gold. We're not going to go into that again. Her adopting that as to how she became stronger through this whole process, although quite clever, was kind of hard to take when at the same time she talked about forgiveness while she slammed everyone involved with the case. Everyone except for her and her attorney, her present attorneys. But I'm not going to read what she said about George or his family again. I won't re victimize those victims, not for Sarah or anyone. But I'm going to get to the other part that she left out. Here's the part I want to read again about all of us on social media, people like myself who are talking about it, streaming about it, following the trial. Those of you who watch me and other channels and everything contributing, we're posting on Twitter, making social commentary, watching the news, reading articles. Well, we're all horrible people, apparently. Another great contributor, she writes, of my gold is social media with its greed, insensitivity, deception, obvious exploitation, and advantageous gain from my criminal case as a whole, in for sentencing me by anticipation as a result of ignorance and hate, conjured and fabricated by the organized crime that is social media, which condemned me in the court of global public opinion since the beginning. My family law case is the new prey, waiting to be picked apart and pillaged from me, being made infamous by social media in my criminal case. It simply seems I cannot forgive and be forgiven and move forward. Social media has made me a pariah. It has caused great oppression and undeniable disadvantages, especially by broadcasting and manipulating my cases online. In my criminal case, as a result, my opportunities to be given a fair, proper, and uninfluenced, successful conclusion was heavily depleted and poisoned. I forgive them. Also, all the media tycoons for not having a life of their own, trying so desperately to make themselves seem so right by making me appear so wrong. Forgiveness for prejudgment, ridiculous theatrics, lies, making and taking blood money from my and other misfortunes, accidents, and catastrophes. It's all over their heads and keyboards. And even after all that's been said and done, theorized, hypothesized, scrutinized, and blasphemed in my case, still no one knows me. Well, That might be true. We get a clear picture of what you're trying to represent, but I don't think we know you. I don't think we can understand how anybody could be so selfish, self centered, and blind to reading the room. I think you do get the picture that you're not as well liked as you thought. I do, Sarah. Speaking right to you. Not that I think you'll ever see this. Although I do wonder what you do see in here, because you seem to know a lot about what's going on out here. Well, if you hear anything, here it is. Read the room. And understand it, most of us just want you to do some self reflection. We want you to do better. We do realize that you think you are the best at everything. But if you are, Sarah, you wouldn't be in this position. It does you no good to blame everybody else for what has happened to you until you take accountability for it yourself. You cannot point fingers at everybody else with any well meaning or any intelligent argument until you take accountability for your own actions. Your voice means nothing when it does not come from fortitude and integrity. And the inability to look inward at how you contributed to this situation and how you lay in a bed that you made yourself, your lack of being able to do that makes anything that comes out of your mouth not credible. Look in all the law books you want, quote all the famous prophets. You can't make Judge Michael Kraynick a bad judge. He's an excellent judge. He was the perfect judge for your case and gave you more consideration than most of us could stomach after all you had done and all you continue to do. I really hope you do better. At this point, with this last letter you wrote, I'm not sure that's possible. I'm actually hoping that those people that are still around you realize it and move far away. I think you're damaged and you're refusing to acknowledge it damages others. But that's just my opinion. And since we're not in trial and I don't feel like I have to be unbiased anymore, I'm going to give it because this is really hard to swallow. Now we're going to talk about all she has to say about her lawyers. It's a little lighter for me because, like, of course she's going to be mad at everybody who refused to go forward. So here we go. My gold also runs deep for my prior attorneys. Mauricio Padillo, who sold me the world with empty promises, then abandoned his responsibility as my attorney after 2.5 years of my life, when finally realizing he was in over his head, all whilst hoarding JAC dollars to fund his staycations with his family when in town from Miami, for having resources ready and available, not allowing me, the client, to ever utilize, which could have greatly progressed my case and perhaps concluded, only for him to decide water parks, fine dining, and choice hotels were more important, and on the JAC's dime. I forgive Frank Bankowitz for committing perjury to the judge and on court record about my attempts to be a proactive defendant and client, inquiring about my discovery, then trying to communicate with no answers or correspondence in any manner for 1 full year and 2 months before I was able to finally meet with him in the courtroom, only to receive his motion to withdraw. Frank J. Bankowitz is forgiven for his greed in taking 15,000 from the JAC, who honorably aid indigent defendants as myself, for taking advantage of and robbing the justice system by lying and avoiding clients, taking their money, and the JAC's. Winston E. Hobson receives my forgiveness, who also unethically perjured himself to the judge and on court record about all the progress in the attorney work he did in my case for the 2 months he was court appointed as, for his allegations of my supposed unethical requests, which meant Me asking about my discovery and trying to have him file a motion for my lawful inclusion to my pretrial conferences cited under FRCP Discovery Rule 3.22001. I wanted to be included in my case, and no progress from being excluded by Bankowitz and Padillo over 3 years prior. Forgiveness also in telling me he would return in a week with my discovery, only to receive his motion to withdraw in the meantime, still not receiving my discovery, and I filing my own motion, enabling me to go to all my hearings, including my pre-trials. Continued forgiveness in his greed and selfish intentions, also for robbing the JAC and indigent defendants of $15,000 more for nothing, justifying any work he really did do in the handful of days he represented me as my attorney. Finally, and with all my gold received from this one, I forgive Patricia A. Cashman for her mean, snotty, egotistical attitude in not listening or caring that I finally received my discovery. I kept asking her, for which she fully withheld from me, citing her ridiculous, untrue reasons was because I saw with my first attorney 4 years prior, and while she, being my present at the time attorney, I saw not one page of or any digital evidence of my discovery, she prohibited me from seeing. Patricia A. Cashman is also forgiven for admitting I had a right to a bond I asked her for, so I could actually utilize one of my rights as opposed to having them always violated as prior, in still ongoing. Then her deference at all my opportunities to do so, for all her lies, condensation, gross, unnecessary arguments, and anger that I asked any questions and wanted to understand, for her doing nothing other than give me an even harder time and request transcripts, then brazenly lie for over $16,000 for doing so, also from the previous resources provided from the JAC. I forgive Patricia A. Cashman for being a liar and a bully. Forgiveness for all those who did not include me to receive my $15,000 I have worked for when Judge Kraynick forced me to be my own attorney to represent myself as pro se. I actually and finally got my own discovery almost 5 years later, filed motions all prior should have done, making them the most expensive motions ever at over $46,000 between the three prior attorneys, Frank Bankowitz, Walter B. Hobson, Patricia A. Cashman. Would they have done so when supposedly representing me? The motions would have been priceless for the proper use of the JAC funds towards ethics, professionalism, honesty, and freedom. I honorably utilized my JAC resources and mentorship as a proactive indigent defendant, avidly defending myself against the liars and thieves and real villains in my criminal case. Who really is the criminal? The JAC can hopefully include their forgiveness for them also. Okay, before I go on more about the judges, or she goes on more about the judges, I just have to address that stuff about the attorneys just a little bit. We all saw filings from both Bankowitz and Hobson and Cashman. As a matter of fact, Cashman actually did a great summary of all of the discovery that was there, got the case ready for trial within a few weeks. Maurice Padillo did a lot of work in 2.5 years. There was a lot of groundwork and investigation work that was done that was actually available for Frank Bankowitz. He did file motions. Sarah just seems to think that, she did have access to the record for a while when she was pro se, but she just doesn't want to acknowledge any of the work that any of the attorneys did. It actually thinks that the little bit of work that she did, which granted, she did do some work. Well, she didn't get her discovery. Judge Kraynick did. And he got the prison to work with her in regards to it, because her attitude with her prior attorneys in herself was the reason she didn't have it. And her denying she never saw anything is just bupkis, because that discovery is covered with her own writing, notes she made herself. To call Patricia Cashman a liar and a bully in a letter like this, that is the epitome of hypocrisy. Sarah needs a mirror. And I know they're not popular in prison. I doubt you can have one as contraband. But Sarah could benefit from a mirror. Let's go on. Judge Wooten and Kraynick, I have great forgiveness for also in not protecting me in listening to my valid request for judicial intervention so I could properly and fairly defend myself against my charges. Instead, I had to defend myself against the attorneys, all appointed by the judge and court, against their lies and exaggerations, reasons unjustifiable, why they were really creeping away from the battlefield and abandoning their professional duty as my attorneys. Judge Kraynick, I forgive you for not giving me any opportunity to stand at your pulpit, to stand at all, to explain the real, truthful side of the story. I believe if the justice system, including yourself, would and should have done any vital homework on the already almost see through attorneys from being spread so thin and simply sending an email for care about their present workload, number of clients, trial schedules already in place before throwing another inmate defendant unknowingly client on the heaping, unimportant pile of warm bodies. More taxpayer dollars could be conserved and less time consumed and wasted for everyone, regardless of what part they play in the supposed system of justice. My forgiveness is deepened for taking even greater time of mine away, years, by not caring to ask me anything about anything to understand, so you could justly render your life defining judgments and without anyone biased and prejudiced. Foremost, Judge Kraynick, I forgive you for kicking me when I was down and choking the life out of my constitutional amendments, most profoundly my sixth right to counsel, as a result of my wholehearted use of my first right to free speech in being my own advocate since no one else would be, and received a paycheck for in all of my free speech, experience driven letters only for remedy, in any collaboration, inclusion, receiving my discovery as an inmate, defendant, and client, not removal of any attorneys to cause more delays or any reason or excuse you may try to force on me, and have already inappropriately accused me of doing prior with your heavily insinuated strategies of mine to try and deflect the glaring red flags, disappointments in true crime in and of the justice system. To this day and all forward, I do not forfeit my rights, any of them, ever, especially my right to be bold, outspoken, and right in my real life experiences with the legal and justice systems. You weren't there, Judge Kraynick, in anything. No meetings, phone calls, visits, and still took my rights and oppressed harder. I must now defend myself against you, praying you do not care too late as all the others and retaliate further against me as a still proud citizen of the United States of my America and freely, excitedly using my God given right to still try and defend myself, to stand all the way up for you to remove my freedom altogether by allowing and approving my stab wound, bloody body parts, rapes, bumps, bruises, and all the rest of the beatings I endured. I hope you can finally see and understand just some of the pain from the extreme difficulties, obstacles, and unfairness, especially in my due process, that you have added in my criminal case and life as an inmate, defendant, and client. All is forgiven. You're not going to stop there. Now we're going to go to the law enforcement. Buckle up, buttercups. For Detectives Copsall and Lowen, I forgive their demonization, lies, blacklisting, coercion, law breaking, solicitation of my case before I even arrive at the corrections department to be booked and fingerprinted. This can be seen in my unbeknownst interrogation video, where I asked what they are doing, what all the pinging was, diverting their texting swarm, while I aimlessly sit there waiting to be arrested, which they know would happen the day before. For Copsel, for bold face lying on the stand to the judge and court on record, she didn't tell me to come to the station to pick up my phone. Why else would I go? I didn't even know about the surprise interrogation. I forgive them for also lying how the news showed up to record my walk of shame, handcuffed and confused on camera. I forgive them for trying to make me lose from the beginning by starting the unquenchable wildfire of sensationalism in distortion, ignorant hate, defamation, and greed by unlawfully broadcasting who they wanted. They would think I was, by their schemes, learned lessons and fraudulent stratagems from the school of manipulation and taking advantage. How much did they make off of me and still are for calling it in, then removing the curtain to expose their personally twisted, murdering monster? Okay, so that's new. She's now accusing law enforcement of making money from the media, the actual news media that captured her perp walk or streamed on her interrogation videos. How is it that law enforcement could have made any money on any of that when it's all public record in the state of Florida? Oh my, okay. Also, my forgiveness and greater goal comes from wondering why nothing viable in my defense was taken from my townhouse, aka the crime scene, to aid in my truth, such as the butcher knife, 5-pronged garden claw, or hammer under the table, together outside where George had easy access to use it if I tried to leave or call for help while being held against my will during his rageful binges, or my bloody pillowcase, stained from me being backhanded because I hid the magnum sized bottle of vodka from him. Why weren't any crime scene photos taken of holes patched in walls and doors, some doors missing knobs, and all locks George removed, cracked windows, broken furniture, obvious unnatural destruction in my townhome? How and why were these missed, uncared about, or not questioned, so I could explain some of my terror? It makes no difference. All is forgiven. Prosecutors Mr. J and Mr. Cacciatore, my forgiveness is also extended for your inappropriate attributed motives, for having to go through years of my pictures, videos, texts to erroneously piece together your deceitful, damning version of what really happened and who I am. After so much availability and for so long, you were finally able to make the circle fit into the square. I forgive your antics, theatricals, ludicrous comments to make sure the world got their money's worth while watching with ignorant pitchforks and burning torches, hoping for the best from you, which is my worst. Instead of dropping the mic, Mr. J, you dropped the bat. For the yelling, finger pointing, and intense underlining to force your theatricals in fantastics on the jury by using imaginary space adventures in fictional characters to blind and bedazzle them with your far, far away from the truth dramatizations. In all of your pieced together productions, I forgive you most for never seeing the light in people, their human goodness, humor in big hearts. You wake up to seek out the opposite, to condemn and to take lives in your own way. See the good that does exist in all of us inherently and unforced, even as the proud Mr. J stated, the kicked dog that bites. Mr. J, who kicked the dog in the first place. In my wisdom, it usually best to leave sleeping dogs lie. then they don't bite. Well, I must have missed the part where Mr. J did a whole Star Wars rendition of the crime scene. That was actually a bit odd. But I bet you she's patting herself on the back for all these little clever, whimsical statements that she's making that mean actually nothing. Really, it just sound like sour grapes. We understand that you're bitter, Sarah. But what do you hope to achieve here, but having an even worse light in the public? Are you hoping, by chance, that you will someone will champion your cause as a true victim and survivor? That actual real victims who have actually accomplished things might side with you, make you part of it, turn you into some kind of martyr or a leader of a great organization? Not going to happen. I'll be surprised if you get a book deal. I'll be surprised if anybody wants to tell you a story. It's riddled with lies, things that are easily proved to have not have happened or be true. I do believe that you suffered some abuse, but that abuse didn't cause your alcoholism like you state. It's documented you were an alcoholic prior. The reason for your divorce was alcoholism. The reason for you not caring for your child and a good man like Brian. This is crazy. But you still want to play victim. Not too late for you either. Maybe you should take some reflection, move forward with a little accountability before writing another letter like this. And we go on, because she goes for the jury too. I forgive the jury, truly, for being weary from this confusion and dysfunction. Also for being hungry and tired and wanting to go home to their families after being away from in full capacity for 2 full weeks. I understand. From this and their brash, misguided, corrupted decision, I was wrongfully judged a murderer instead of a survivor. For this, all is forgiven. For this, I can still survive and stand tall, having an even greater, the greatest opportunity to finally be understood in the Supreme Court for my appeal. I didn't lose. God just wanted me to win in a different way. Freedom in forgiveness. She did read this part at the sentencing hearing when she gave her statement, but I'm going to read it again as it concludes. In my soft spoken conclusion, I ask this: would I be the darling mother, celebrated woman of the year, if it were I who died? How many daughters, mothers, sisters, aunts, grandmothers, nieces, and friends have been because they did? I am a survivor. Learn to do good, seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow, all encompassing, protect the abused. Sarah Boone, 12 to 2024. Remember, this part was from her written statement. So there we have it, all of it. We did get through the reading. That was rough. I do feel like I need to say something. I am going to follow the appeal. I think she has a right to an appeal since she received life. There also are things like being made pro se that she does have a right to have looked at. Although I don't think that Judge Kraynick did anything outside the law, and he well documented the need for it to be this way. How many times she was warned. I do understand that she's bitter, but I want to remind her and everyone else of one simple fact. Two things can be true at the same time. Sarah Boone is indeed a victim. Well, she's not the victim that she claims to be, and I'll go into that in a second. Well, she is a victim. So she is indeed a survivor because she survived some type of victimization. She was abused. But she is also a murderer. For whatever reason she has in her head, she did, with knowledge, let George die. She showed total disregard for another human being's life. And I don't care what the reason was. That makes you a murderer. You can't wipe it clean because of things that people did to you. Two wrongs never make a right. You still are accountable for what you did. Well, somehow, in everything that she breathes, writes, and exists right now, she is justified. for all her misdeeds. And I don't see it that way. And from many of you talking to me about it, I don't think you do either. But I will say she is a survivor and she is fighting hard for her rights. Well, she's no victim advocate. Not at all. This case was hard. Her attorneys warned her that battered spouse syndrome defense was difficult to prove. They tried to give her the advice that legally, even if she was battered spouse, even if she qualified because of what happened to her, to prove it in a court put her at jeopardy because her side would be told too, and that people could look at it two different ways. I sincerely believe that every attorney involved in the case gave her that very common sense advice, and she dumped them. She was rude to them. She insisted that she was the victim and that they would find her not guilty because George laid hands on her. Well, she forgot that we could tell the other side of the story. The part of what did you do when George laid hands on you? What was your response? How did you act? Did you turn into a retaliatory, petulant child and torture and intimidate him, embarrass him, control him? Did you not think any of that would come forward? And because people didn't just come out and believe every word you said, you publicly humiliate his family in a court of law by blaming them for everything that happened to you because they love George. It's a lot to take. This is supposed to be just about the letter, but I did just hear this morning that the appointed appeal attorney just filed with the court that they don't do appeals and they're going to have to find somebody else. So we're going to have to get another name on that to find out who's filing the appeal. So nothing's been done yet. Well, they did file with the court, which will give her more time and protect her rights. I'm going to end it there. We'll talk soon, I'm sure, again about Sarah Boone.